what should you be aiming for in your life? And I can tell you that, roughly speaking. If you're looking for something that will give your life meaning, that's actually quite straightforward as far as I've been able to tell. And this is where the nihilists have it so wrong that it's almost unbelievable. And as far as I'm concerned, fundamentally, they're just escaping from responsibility anyways. Even though they have perfectly rational arguments for their nihilism. It's like, everything's meaningless. It's like, no, first of all, no. Pain is not meaningless. You're never going to meet anyone who will ever tell you that their own pain is meaningless. So we can just forego the whole meaningless argument right off the bat. It's like there may be no positive meaning in life. We could have a discussion about that. But self-evident negative meaning exists, and everyone knows it. And even someone who's anarchic and nihilistic to the core, you know, if you drive a spike through their hand, they're going to act like that has meaning. And since I'm an existentialist, yes. And look at how people act instead of what they say. Then they'll act out the idea that that has meaning very, very rapidly. So we'll just go with that. Now, you might say, well, there's all sorts of suffering, and that's self-evident. But that's not the kind of meaning that I believe doesn't exist. I believe that only positive meaning doesn't exist, which is, you know, a little on the negative side, I would say, to begin with. But I can understand it. People can have pretty dreadful lives, you know. And you can easily get yourself in a situation where it seems like there's nothing at all to your life except suffering. And that's what happens to people who become suicidal, for example. And it's no joke. And they have their reasons, man. You know, sometimes those people have been hurt in ways that are absolutely unimaginable. And so when they see a horizon that's full of nothing but suffering, you can't just wave that away. But I would say, the first thing we might hypothesize is that since pain is an unalterable fact of meaning, and certainly seems to be negative, that one of the things you might want to try to orient yourself in relationship to is the reduction of human suffering. You know, because I think that's an important goal. And you know, the answer to what do you do about a child who's suffering in a concentration camp isn't who the hell's going to care in a million years, right? That's not the right answer. And if it's not the right answer in that situation, then perhaps it's not the right answer at all. And the right answer to who the hell's going to care anyways in a million years is why in the world would you frame the statement that idiotically? I mean, anybody, this is kind of a trick of the imagination in some sense, anybody who's quick-witted can come up with a frame of reference that makes anything, that makes almost anything lack meaning within that frame of reference. Well, all that means to me is that you picked a stupid frame of reference, right? Why should you accept without doubt the consequence of your stupid algorithm? Who's going to care in a million years? Yeah, God. Really? You got to be able to do better than that if that's how you're going to wipe out meaning. Well, so what do you want for meaning? All right, reduce suffering. That'd be a good one. You could devote your life to that. And I would say, start locally. And I think this is the alternative to right-wing nationalism, which is too much order, and left-wing chaos, which is too much chaos. We don't want to go down that rabbit hole again, either of them. So what's the alternative? I thought about this for a very long time. It took me decades to come to this conclusion. The conclusion is that you straighten yourself out, and you do that humbly. There's this idea in the New Testament, which I get quite a kick out of, that you're not supposed to pray in public. It's a little more complicated than that, actually. You're not supposed to pray in public until you've sorted out the dispute that you had with your brother, for example. I really like that idea. Because what it means is that you shouldn't make a public display of your virtue until you've straightened up your damn life. And this is one of the things I really don't like about protests. And I really don't like the fact that university students are taught by their half-witted professors that the way that you change the world You don't change the world by going and waving signs at people that you've defined as more evil than you. First of all, the probability that they're more evil than you is actually quite low. Because evil though they may be, you're in the same damn boat. And if you've divided the world up conveniently so that you can identify the innocent and the damned, or the oppressor and the oppressed, and you think that you're in the positive category, then the probability that you're part of the solution and not part of the problem is zero. So it's just not that easy, you know. And the most profound people that I've ever read have said the same thing over and over. It's like the line between good and evil runs down the middle of every human heart. And the first thing that you're supposed to do is win that battle on your own territory. And that's no bloody joke. That's a difficult thing to do because it means that you have to recognize yourself as a perpetrator of great evil. And that is what you are. And that's a terrible thing for people to learn. You know, you look at the 20th century and you think, well, who brought on the horrors of the communist systems and the horrors of the Nazi systems? The answer is people just like you. And that's the answer. And if you don't understand that and you think that answer is wrong, then you're not very wise. And it's not surprising because the price that you pay for wisdom is radical disillusionment and the confrontation with evil. And no one wants that. Really. It's a terrible thing to confront. And that's because human beings are terrible creatures. Now, I think we're also absolutely remarkable creatures and wonderful creatures, but we have an unlimited capacity for brutality and evil. And every one of us carries it. And so what you do is you try to sort that out in your own life. And you start, I had a guy talk to me just a while back about his life hadn't been going very well, and he decided to put himself together. And he started doing this little ritual thing, which I thought was quite cool. He was kind of an isolated guy, very overweight guy. When I talked to him, he lost about 130 pounds, which was quite impressive. It was part of him putting himself together. But he started doing it by building. He had a bunch of Legos left over from his childhood. And the first thing he did, because he was feeling very nihilistic and hopeless, he found that he got a little bit of satisfaction out of building little things out of Legos, you know. And I thought, well, that was pretty interesting. And so he built a bunch of these things. And then he said, well, I got a bunch of these things built, and then I had to figure out how to organize them in the room they were in. I thought, that's cool, because he started high resolution at the level of detail, you know, and was building something that was trivial. He knew that he was just playing a game. But then, as soon as he had a collection of those, then he had to sort out the space that he was going to organize them in. And then he figured out, well, he had to sort out the room that they were going to be in. So he started organizing and beautifying the room. And at the same time, he had modified his diet and he was putting himself together. And that's the right thing to do. That's the right thing to do. Is that there are responsibilities that are awaiting you, right, that are in your own grasp. And you know what they are. This is also something that no one can preach to you about. It's something you have to decide for yourself. And you can do it quite straightforwardly. And it's something that I do on a regular basis. You sit down in the evening or in the morning and ask yourself, like you're asking someone that you want the answer from, like you really genuinely want to have the answer. You're not telling yourself. None of that. You're asking yourself. All right, there's a bunch of things about my life that aren't in order, that aren't together, and I know it, and they're making me suffer, and they're making me less than I am. And there's some of those things that are staring me right at the face, and I know what they are, and there's some of those that I can put in order today with a little bit of work, so that when I wake up tomorrow, the domain of my experience, which is basically being itself, the domain of my experience will be more pristine and better put together than it is today. You ask yourself that, you'll find right away. You know what they are. 5 things that come up. Bang, 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 bang. And they'll all be things that aren't very heroic, they're kind of trivial, and that you've been avoiding. You've been avoiding them. Those are little dragons of chaos, those things. And you know, they're just little, but that's good because you're not much of a hero warrior, and so maybe little tiny dragons are all the ones that you can put up with for now. You know, you sort those things out, and it'll, first of all, it'll order the being around you in a more pristine and productive way, and it'll make you just a little bit more focused and together. And what that'll mean is that the next thing you can do is ask yourself the same question, and the problems that will emerge will be slightly larger and more complex. And then you can try to put those in order, and that'll make everything around you more pristine and better put together, and it'll make you a little bit stronger and more clear-headed. And then another set of problems will emerge that's a little bit larger, and if you continue to do that, you know, you'll sort yourself out, you'll clean up your room, you'll put your house in order, and then you can start to work in the community. And by that time, you'll actually have some power and some self-confidence and some competence and some credence, and you'll be much less likely to stupidly hit something complicated with a stick and say that you fixed it. But you have to start low. You have to. Carl Jung said, one of his very interesting phrases. He says that the reason that modern people can't see God is because they won't look low enough. I really like that. I mean, he's an extraordinarily wise person, and what he meant by that was something like what I'm telling you, is that the secret to your existence is right in front of you, and it manifests itself as all those things you know you should do, but you're avoiding. Because one of the things you might ask yourself is, of course you're useless and weak and miserable and cruel and all of those horrible things, but partly that's because you're also not what you could be, and part of the reason for that is that you're not doing what you know you should be doing. So you might ask yourself, because this is a very interesting game, if you started doing the things that you know you should do, this is a discussion with your own conscience, if you started doing those things that you know you should do, and you did that diligently, what the hell would you be like in 10 years? Now that's an exciting game. That's an interesting game. And if you play that, you'll find that you're a hell of a lot more than you were. And that's something, at least. You might not hit the pinnacles, but you're going to be a lot more than you are. And then, if you're not weak and miserable and wretched and suffering and dismal and self-pitying and all those things, you're going to be a lot less resentful. You're going to be a lot less brutal. You're going to be a lot less cruel to yourself and to other people. Well, that's a pretty good start. You know, even if you're not a positive force for good in the world, if you just weren't wretched and horrible, that would be a good initial contribution. No? I would say, too, there's a corollary that goes along with that. And this is, so you could look at it this way. This is something that I tried to explain. I did a video on Pinocchio, a couple of videos about Pinocchio, which I've been quite fascinated by, because it's a very good illustration in popular culture of how archetypes manifest themselves and how people understand the archetypes even if they don't know they understand them. Because Pinocchio is a very interesting movie if you think about it. You know, you might ask, well, when modern people think about people going to church, they think, well, how can people believe those foolish superstitions? It's like, yeah, fair enough, good question. Well, what the hell do you think you're doing when you go to a movie? Like, what are you doing? Here you are. I know you probably haven't seen Pinocchio lately, but whatever. You know, it's the same thing. You're an adult. You bring your 5-year-old to see Pinocchio, and you're just as entranced as he is. And think about what you're doing. First of all, you know those are drawings. They're not real creatures. They're drawings. Second, they're about a puppet. A wooden puppet who actually happens to wander around, who is being guided through life by a cricket, whose highest goal is to kill for reasons no one can understand. And somehow that makes a fairy turn him into something that's real. It's like, that's strange, people, right? The fact that you're doing that is very peculiar. And it says something about what people are like. It means that we understand things that we don't know we understand. And so Pinocchio is it's a very interesting movie. I can tell you what its fundamental presupposition is. I'll just guide you through it very, very rapidly. So, at the beginning of the movie, Geppetto, who's the archetype of the good father, by the way, which is an archetype that we've forgotten about, but it does exist because our culture isn't just a tyrannical patriarchy, as you can tell by the fact that we're warm and comfortable and we're not tearing each other to shreds at the moment, which is what you do in a state of absolute chaos, right? It's mayhem while you're freezing and starving, right? And that isn't what we have. We have peace, and it's rare, and it's amazing that we have it. And we shouldn't take it for granted, because it's not the normal order of things. The normal order of things is destructive chaos. And if you're fortunate enough to live somewhere that's peaceful and productive, you should thank your lucky stars every second of your life. And if you don't do that, all it means is that you don't know anything about history, and you know nothing about human beings. Because things can get absolutely monstrous, and it happens all the time. And there's always a fraction of the population who thinks that's how they'd like things to be. And perhaps there's a fraction of you that's like that too. And I wouldn't nurture that fragment if I was you, unless you want to go where it will take you. And anyways, back to Pinocchio. So Geppetto's a good guy, right? And you can tell that he's got a warm house and it's full of toys and it's full of music boxes and you know he's got a little kitten and he's got a goldfish and he takes care of them and so he's a good guy. He makes this puppet and then he puts a mouth on the puppet and that's the final act. So the puppet can have its capacity to speak and that's what you want if you're a good father is you want to take your son and you want to turn him into someone who can speak, right? Who can speak his soul. And so Geppetto puts a smile on his son's face and says, wouldn't it be wonderful if he could be a good boy? It's like, yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful, right? Because that's what you do if you're a good father. You think, wouldn't it be possible if this puppet could actually become something genuine and independent with its own voice? Well, he says that's unlikely and goes off to bed. And then a star appears up in the window and he wishes on a star. And you think, what does that mean? What does it mean to wish on a star? It's like, well, a star is the light that beckons in the darkness, right? And it's something transcendent. You look up into the night sky and it's awe-inspiring. Whether you're religious or not, you're looking into the infinite. Well, you make a relationship with the infinite by wishing on a star. You raise your eyes above the horizon and point at the light that beckons in the darkness. And you say, I wish more than anything else that my son could become a real person. It's like, that's what you do if you're a good father. You don't want to make him into a slave. You don't want to be a tyrant. You don't want him to be a puppet. You want him to be something strong and independent. Well, so off Pinocchio goes out into the world, right? And he faces all these different moral problems. He's armed with his conscience. It turns out to be a bug, right? Well, why? Well, it's because things bug you. You know, your conscience bugs you. And the reason that the conscience is Jiminy Cricket is because that's the same initials as Jesus Christ. And Jiminy Cricket is southern U.S. slang for Jesus Christ. And no doubt the animators thought that was very comical. And I'll tell you that the bug is a very strange representation of Christ, that's for sure. Who would make it into a cricket? And he's also rather error-prone in the movie, so because the movie doesn't have precisely a formal Christian structure. But part of the reason, this took me a long time to figure out too, is that you have to have a dialogue with your conscience. But it has to be a dialogue, because it's actually not 100% right. It has to be something that you build by having a discussion with it across time, and that's actually what Pinocchio does with Jiminy Cricket as the movie progresses. Both the puppet and the conscience get wiser by banging themselves against the world. And the puppet has to resist the temptation of easy fame and celebrity. That's the first temptation, right? Because he's asked to be an actor, which is an easy way to be celebrity. It's like the Kardashians, right? It's status without responsibility or competence. And so that beckons as an attraction. And then he learns that lying is a very bad idea, right? That's why his nose grows, so he has to get that sorted out. And then he's asked to present himself as a victim of circumstances. That's what the fox and the coyote do. And when he decides that he's too ill to go back to school, they take him to Pleasure Island, where he's trained to be a jackass that works for slavers in the salt mines. Right. Well, not bad for animation, I would say. And then at the end of the movie, he tries to go back home because he's terribly lost and he's half jackass because the people at Pleasure Island have taught him to do nothing but bray, which I can't help but think offers, or what would you say, is an appalling parallel to what's happening to people who are being educated in modern universities, right? Which are increasingly playhouses where you're taught to bray. I mean, listen, I can't listen to protesters. It's just painful. It's this constant repetition of soulless nonsense. The reason it's so loudly chanted is because the protesters are trying to convince themselves even more desperately than they're trying to convince the people that they're talking to. So anyways, Pinocchio goes back home, half jackass and half dead, and he tries to find his father, but there's no going home, right? Not once you're an adult, once you're a young adult, you don't get to go back home because there isn't anyone there that can tell you what to do anymore. And so Pinocchio goes home and his father isn't there, and he finds out that he has to go to the bottom of chaos itself to rescue his father. And that's what we have to do, right? Because our civilization is in a state of crisis, and that was predicted long ago by people like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. And partly what you're trying to do when you go to university is to go to the heart of darkness, right? To the place that terrifies you the most, and to find what values your culture really has. And that's what it means to go down to the bottom of the depths, to the thing that terrifies you the most, and to revivify your father. It's a very old story. The Egyptians were telling that story 4,000 years ago. It's one of the oldest stories of mankind. And so that's what you have to do. You unite yourself with your culture so that you're more than just a weak and simple-minded individual, right? You dedicate yourself to the study of what's great about the past, and you incorporate it so that there can be something to you. And then you bring your father back up to the surface so that the culture can see and live again. And then that makes you into a real individual. Well, that's the movie. Well, we watch it. We're captivated by it. Now it's time to understand it. It's time to understand it in an articulated and conscious manner, because it's too late for us to be unconscious anymore. And so we have Scylla and Charybdis. We have the chaos of the left. And the left says, well, we need to tear down structures because they oppress. It's like, well, obviously structures oppress. because something's good at the top of a structure and not so good at the bottom. So if you have any value structure, it's going to privilege some things and exclude others. But if you scrap the value structures, then there's nothing to live for. So we can't do that. That's just chaos. And then the radical right says, back to the nation. It's like, really? You know, we went back to the nation a couple of times, and it doesn't really look that great. And part of the reason for that is that the purpose of the nation isn't the nation. The purpose of the nation is to produce citizens who transcend and rejuvenate the nation. And so the nation should be properly subordinated to the individual, right? To the divine individual, for that matter. And that's what we figured out in the West. Now, it isn't that we only figured that out in the West, but so far we've been fortunate enough to put it into reasonable practice in our political institutions, and thank God for that. At least it's worked somewhere, and we'd be completely foolish to give that up, because look at what it's provided us with. It's remarkable. We're free. As free as we can be. That doesn't mean that we're happy, because freedom and happiness are not the same thing at all. But we did figure out that the state should be subordinate to the wisdom of the individual, to the sight and the wisdom of the individual. But that puts a heavy responsibility on everyone. That means you have to be the wise individual who can see and speak. That's your job. And if you do that, the thing that's so cool about that is, you know, you need a meaning in your life that enables you to bear the suffering of your life without becoming corrupted. That's the basic rule. And you have to build yourself into something that you can actually respect, so that you can see yourself bearing that terrible existential burden properly. And then you don't lose hope and you don't lose meaning, because you can see that you're strong enough to stand up underneath that burden. And then there's something about you that you can respect, and that maybe other people can respect, and it will help bring suffering in the world to an end. And it will help people develop fully as individuals. And it will enable us to avoid the dehumanizing, rigid, sterile uniformity of the nationalistic left and the appalling, chaotic, devouring chaos of the radical left. How about no? The individual. That's the secret to the world. And you're all individuals, and so you're all the secret to the world. And all you have to do to discover that is pick up your damn responsibility. Stop listening to people who keep burdening you with rights. How many goddamn rights do you want, man? It's like you need some responsibility. So pick it up. Open your eyes and learn how to make yourself articulate. And that way the world won't descend into the series of hells that it already descended into in the 20th century.